Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in to Refining Rhetoric. Today I am interviewing Scott Postma. He is the CEO and founder of Kepler Education. He has a wonderful worldview called Christian Humanism that I hadn't really heard expressed before, but we'll learn all about it together today. Let's jump in.
Classical Conversation Studios presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Refining Rhetoric. Today, my guest is Scott Postma. Scott has served as a minister for 20 years, a Christian educator for over 25 years, and he's a co-founder, president, and CEO of Kepler Education. He holds degrees in humanities, classical studies, religion and English literature, creative writing and theology, and writes prolifically around the internet, including on Substack and his blog. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Robert. It's good to be here. Thanks for the opportunity.
Now, Scott, one of the things we like to talk about is interesting ideas and concepts. And one of the things that you write about is the idea of being a Christian humanist. And so, what does that mean to you, and why is that something that you believe Christians should embrace?
Thank you. Yeah, it's an interesting question because it does cause some confusion for folks. But Christian humanism it embodies a number of different features. In one sense, it's rooted in the 15th century, Studia Humanitatis, the study of the humanities. And so we can think of the writings and works of guys like Bruni and Petrarch and Erasmus, and so we have that sense of the way Christian humanism came about. But sometimes that's a little misleading as well, because there was an element of the Italian Renaissance that moved into a more secular project or a more secular view of humanism that made man the measure of all things, rather than in the middle of all things. And so when we think of Christian humanism in the 20th century, there's a sense in which we have a belief that human freedom and individual conscience, unencumbered rational inquiry, these are all intrinsic within the Orthodox, small o Orthodox Christianity. And so you can have thought in the Republic of Letters, intellectual thought, that is rooted in the incarnation. And so when we think of 20th century Christian humanists, these are guys who are interested in the affirmation and flourishing of human life, culture, all of that stemming from the incarnation, the aspects of the gospel that make human flourishing really possible. So that's kind of what I mean when I think of Christian humanism, or when we talk about it.
So, how does that affect like your day-to-day worldview or how you behave if you're a Christian humanist, if you've embraced that kind of idea?
Yeah, so when we think of Christianity, obviously, we think of the way Christianity, obviously, as followers of Christ, that leads us individually, to think about things a certain way and to live a certain way. But then that extends into the way we think about big ideas. How does the incarnation affect things like politics? How does it affect things like art? How does it affect things, not just family and individual living, but how does it affect culture? How does it influence the way that we think about education? And so this is where Christian humanism is trying to recover, if you will, from a Christian standpoint. And this happened throughout history, recovering the idea that wisdom and virtue can be gleaned and understood not just from Scripture, but from great writings, going back all the way to, say, Homer and pagan writers up through where Christianity really animated classical thought. And so one way that I try to maybe describe it sometimes in a practical sense is, if you think about say math facts, right? If you understand how math works, addition and subtraction,
Mhm.
there's real basic principles, and then you begin to you have exercises that move from simple to more complex, applying that principle. And so we might think of the way the gospel informs our way of thinking about forgiveness, and thinking about loving our neighbor, and all the things that the gospel does in our a salvific way, but then that extends into more complex ways of applying the gospel and understanding the way humanity in a universal sense responds to different circumstances. And so we can see that in history and literature and poetry. And so it extends into greater writings than just scripture. It's not that scripture is in any way less important. It is the most important, but we also see that extended, that wisdom and virtue found in other writings as well.
Do you have other thought leaders that you would point people to if they wanted to learn more about Christian humanism?
Sure. In the contemporary, in our contemporary time, guys like Bradley Berzer at Hillsdale has written fairly extensively about Christian humanism. Guys like Alan Jacobs. Uh, there's another great work, Incarnational Humanism by Jen Zimmerman. And William Franklin and Joseph Shaw has written a work on recovering Christian humanism. And so when we think of Christian humanism, we often think of like secular humanism, right? And when people hear the word humanism, they automatically think, materialism, secularism.
Right.
But guys like Abraham Kuyper would say that's cut flower, right? We're taking the flower but leaving the root, because real humanism, came out of Christianity. And so if we go back, say, to the 19th century, we read people like Irving Babbitt or G.K. Chesterton, Christopher Dawson, T.S. Eliot, C.S. Lewis, Flannery O'Connor, J.R. Tolkien. These are all Christian humanists who are thinking about the way the Republic of Letters influences culture. And so those are some of the thought leaders maybe I would recommend.
So basically, it's kind of the idea that that if we follow Christ, then we should live our lives oriented in a way that benefits ourselves and our neighbors in a way, and we can learn not just from the Bible, but we can learn from the best thoughts throughout history. Is that kind of sum it up for
Yeah,
us lay people?
yeah, I think so. Matthew Arnold talked about the best that's been thought and written, and so as Christians, we can explore that with a fundamental understanding of the gospel of our Christianity rooted in the incarnation. But then we can explore that even further. So it's really understanding that Christianity is the root of all human flourishing, and that can be explored further through great literature, great books. Somebody once said, it's the great books and the greatest book.
Yeah, great books and the greatest books. I love that. Now, you've gotten to write a lot about Flannery O'Connor and her writings, both on your Substack and in your recent dissertation. So, what about her and how she communicated with humanity really captivates you and has driven your interest in her?
Yeah, Flannery O'Connor, of course, is a very interesting character because a lot of people think of her writing and they think of piles of dead bodies, right? These
Hmm.
grotesque characters and disturbing sorts of people that you encounter. But Flannery O'Connor really, she focused on what she called Christian realism. And so, if just to kind of, divert just slightly, J.R. Tolkien wrote about escapism and kind of embracing the idea that a right kind of escapism helps us recover a view and image of reality. So Flannery O'Connor didn't like the word escapism because often it was associated with the idea of trying to escape reality. Where she was saying, no, to recover it, we want to get into into the weeds, right? The real life. And so somebody like Flannery O'Connor can write about violence and suffering in a way that brings grace to her characters because she sees, the connection between the supernatural and the natural. She has a worldview, a Christian humanist worldview that allows us to look at some of these grotesque characters that would disturb us. And then they speak the truth. And so it sort of unsettles us. It might grasp our attention while leaving our understanding unsatisfied. And so it allows us to contemplate and think about, the realities of life. So this is where I think Flannery O'Connor really excels and succeeds in capturing the imagination, and really off-putting for a lot of people because they don't have that what she called anagogical vision.
What is anecological vision for us lay people?
And anagogical vision is that vision that St. Augustine talked about, that where we can see reality, if you will, sort of the seam between the natural world and the supernatural world. So Flannery
Right.
O'Connor often wrote about the fact that she didn't want her readers to, know necessarily where they were standing. When they looked at something, is this the real world or is this the eternal world? So because there is a relationship, the way C.S. Lewis put it is that we've never met a mere mortal, right? So everything that's happening in this
Mm,
life has some eternal echo to it, and so that's the anagogical vision.
I gotcha. Yeah, one of the things my mom's been saying recently to us at Classical Conversations is the real world is heaven. Like this is just the temporary world.
Yeah, yeah,
What the real right in the Bible tells us, your battle isn't against flesh and blood, but spirits. But of course, we have this skin suit on. We're all souls with a temporary exoskeleton body that we're inhabiting, but our soul's going to live forever in heaven or tortured forever in hell. At least that's what us Christians believe, and for good historical and scientific reasons, we believe that. And of course, the transformation of Jesus Christ born again. Where do people start with Flannery O'Connor? Because we are more familiar with C.S. Lewis or Tolkien. Those are the names that are out there. And then Flannery O'Connor is often like you should read her too. But because of her subject matter, she doesn't seem to get as much airtime as the other ones.
yeah. I think that's a good point. I think that's a great observation. Um, I would say a great place to start is with her short story Revelation, and the reason I suggest that is for a couple of reasons. Revelation really gets it's one of her last works before she passed, and it was actually published posthumously, and so it was something that she was working on as in her final days, but it really gives us the clearest vision, I think, of her whole entire project. So once you understand Revelation, you can see the revelation that our characters are supposed to experience, in some of the stories that are maybe not quite as overt. And another interesting fact about this work, as well as the Enduring Chill, that's another one that would maybe be a second read, is some scholars really believe that C.S. Lewis actually influenced the way she wrote both of those short stories,
Hmm.
because she was reading Lewis's Miracles and Letters to Malcolm as she, in her final days, and she read Miracles a couple of times, very interested in it, and spoke about how Lewis influenced her, and so many believe that influenced the way that she, delivered the short story Revelation, and I think that's a good entry, good introduction to all of her other works as well.
Hello, everyone. I'm hoping that I will see you at our National Events Weekend on May 2nd through 4th, 2024, in sunny Southern Pines, North Carolina. This is being presented by our Classical Conversations Foundation. It is a time for CC families from around the nation to experience 3 days of events and learning about classical education and celebrating the hard work of fellow families on their homeschooling journey. Some of the major events we have are our national conference, where myself and my mom will be speaking, along with other panels, such as a grad panel and a dad panel, and you'll hear a lot about the math map. We'll have a national commencement, so if you have a graduating senior, this year we've actually doubled the number of commencements, so we've added a second one so we can allow more people to come and celebrate with us. So be sure to look out for registration for that. And of course, we have the National Memory Master Competition, where one student will win $10,000. And it's such a fun time. And we are going to be opening that up to the public for the first time so you can sit in and watch it. And it's going to be an exciting time. There's a ton of things on the agenda. We'll have food trucks. We've got camps for your students. So if you're a Classical Conversations family, we are encouraging you to come May 2nd through 4th, 2024. Registration is going to open on November 1st, and you can learn more by going to classicalconversationsfoundation.org today. And again, that website is classicalconversationsfoundation.org to get your tickets, and we'll see your family there. My oldest child is 8. At what age is it appropriate to introduce children or young adults to our materials?
Yeah, that I think every child is different. We would often say, and I think you'd probably agree with this, that a child's age only tells us when they were born, right?
Sure.
Uh, how they mature and where they're at different stages is going to probably be up to a parent. But I think a young teenager could begin reading her works, and maybe starting with some of those stories, and begin to process and understand some of the things that are going on. There's some other works that would be a little bit more mature. They deal with a little bit more thematic elements. But again, she's talking about, real world, Christian realism, and a lot of her thinking was influenced by Jacques Maritain, who was a Christian humanist, a French Thomist, actually, that really influenced the way she understood art. And so he would take Thomas Aquinas and sort of talk about the sin of the man and the sin of the artist. That for the artist, all of our work, it should never be separated from our Christianity. And so for a Christian, we don't have to just write about ecclesiastical matters. Everything we write about, we would be writing about with the understanding, our Christian worldview, with the understanding of redemption being, the chief end of, of what the project of the gospel really is.
Now, you are the CEO of Kepler Education. Do you all read Flannery O'Connor in some of your online classical classes?
Yeah, I do believe there are some of the teachers do have Flannery O'Connor. Our platform allows independent teachers to develop their own courses, and there are some basic guidelines that we have adopted that allow us to give credit. But within those boundaries, the teachers can really put together works that they believe would be really helpful for students. And I'm not thinking off the top of my head of a particular class at the moment, but there have been teachers who have offered, Flannery O'Connor readings, and there probably are even today.
Now, can you talk a little bit about why you call Kepler Education the marketplace for live online classical Christian education, and why you started it?
Yeah, so we, it sort of started out with a need. We were partnering with Roman Roads Media, and Roman Roads publishes classical Christian curriculum, and there were parents asking for assistance in having some online classes to deliver some of the material. Maybe they felt they weren't really ready to um, work with some of the themes that say in the Greeks and the Romans, and asked if there were some teachers. And so I started teaching with Daniel Fukushon in Roman Roads, teaching for them. And as the demand and the need got bigger, we thought, let's launch a marketplace where a lot of really good teachers aren't able maybe to make it financially, say a head of household, be able to support their family and teach. But we have technology today that allows us to interact with students, in ways that we didn't have maybe even a decade ago. And so we begin to put together a platform where independent teachers could deliver curriculum to families, where families wouldn't necessarily give up their agency. And I say necessarily, some families are working through, how do they, take the responsibility for their children's education. And so we're constantly, teaching that. But what we're doing is coming alongside through the division of labor to help families maintain their agency in raising their children, and giving them a classical Christian education.
Now, through COVID and the, I guess, exposure of these DEI and CRT and LGBT stuff in our government schools, we've seen an explosion of homeschoolers. Tell us about how that's affected your marketplace, and have you seen more demand and more people coming into your classes, and what classes are the most popular on your site?
Yeah, so definitely COVID. It certainly facilitated. We'd started before COVID, but it did accelerate our. We put together some $1 COVID classes when that launched, just as we were putting things together, and so a bunch of teachers jumped in there, and I think we had just in that little semester, I think we had like 300 registrations from what we called our refugee families, and so I think a lot of the discovery and understanding of what the agenda in public education has been all along, and how it's manifesting itself in our current climate, or current cultural climate, I should say, has accelerated people's need or realization for a need to take control of their children's education. And so we've seen growth at Kepler, families coming in, and the families that use Kepler, they some of them take maybe one or two courses that kind of use us a la carte. Others, we have a diploma track, and they'll use our diploma track because they're trying to, how do I wrap our arms around this and really take care of our children well, and so they can use that platform a variety of different ways, and so this is, we've watched the growth, and again, families who have come to Kepler even just in the last year or two, a lot of the same story. We knew it was bad. We didn't think it was going to be bad in our town. We thought our school was okay, and then, sure enough, they're dealing with some of the things that you just talked about.
How do you help the teachers and the parents and the students understand their unique roles in the education process when they're using an online platform?
Yeah, so online is, it can be complex for some folks. Others find it, comes very naturally for them. But I think we have an academic advisor, and I think our communication just continues to reinforce the idea that parents are the primary educator. Through the division of labor, we're here to help, and so we'll help as much as you want to um, help us, but we'll operate in loco parentis, and still continue to encourage parents to, take responsibility for their children's education. And the teachers that come on our platform really share our worldview, and so we go through a vetting process. Any teacher that delivers courses on the Kepler platform, they have to be a mere Christian, meaning they ascribe to Nicene Creed and a number of um, you know uh, things that you had just mentioned a moment ago, we probably
Sure.
wouldn't have had to define as being Christian some years ago. And then secondly, they have to be broadly classical. So they might come from some different perspectives on classical education, because in the recovery and the Renaissance there's some different ideas. So we're very broadly classical. But probably one of the most important besides those two is what we call Burkean conservatism. And that really would be in some ways kind of have a Christian humanist view that we want to preserve the permanent things, and so however, we see progress in the modern world, they have to progress has to go along contours of the natural created order, and so really, so Christian, classical, and conservative. And I qualify that conservative because a lot of times people think that's a political statement, and although it flows into politics, it's much more of a cultural worldview.
Yes, I read the quote the other day. I'm not sure who said it, but basically, our education system has been so busy asking what can they do, they haven't said what should we be doing. And I think,
Yes.
when you see statistics like 7% of students in this high school are reading at grade proficiency, or this school district spends $28,000 per student and only 30% of them know history. Well, I think you and I would agree that we see the results of people asking what can be done instead of what should be done. And I think when you're saying conservative, you're saying what should be done.
Right. Yes, exactly. It's the ought versus the is, right? This is the way, humanity is operating and functioning, but how ought we, to do that? What ought we to do? What are the norms? And yeah, I 100% agree.
Now, what is your Substack and what do you like to write about on that platform?
Sure. Well, I have a Substack and a blog. ScottPostma.net will lead to the Substack. My Substack is Rumbling Toward Heaven. Rumbling Toward Heaven is the title of it, because I'm writing primarily about Christian humanism there, and really drawing from the research I did for my dissertation, and hopefully expanding that even further, but looking at literature that sort of captures the idea of how Christian humanism, it's not just about personal salvation, but it's about the recovery of human flourishing for everyone. That Christian worldview ought to play itself out and manifest itself in a variety of ways, not just in one's personal salvation. And so those are the ideas that I talk about there. So literature, history, poetry. I've been writing about O'Connor, Lewis, and Tolkien and their use of grotesque characters to sort of confront the culture in the mid 20th century, and so that's what I've been working on there. On my daily blog, I just write. A lot of it just comes out of it's fodder from reading ideas that I'm playing with and thinking about, and just as a way to sort of flesh out big ideas and start conversations.
Now, are you still teaching if someone goes to the Kepler education platform? Do they have classes that you're teaching, or are you just kind of overseeing that platform?
Yeah, well, up until this year, I taught 6 to 8 courses on the platform every year. This year, I'm only teaching one course, and I think it's almost full. So there might be a couple of seats available, but it's Christianity and culture. It's the recovery of Christian humanism. So we'll read writings going all the way back to the classical, period, primary sources, up to the modern 20th century, and look at this idea of Christian humanism. And so it's for upperclassmen and gap year students. And I believe it will be approved. It's been submitted for dual enrollment credit for college credit, regionally accredited college credits. So I think it will be approved, but we're still waiting on that.
Whenever I talk to a thoughtful person, I always want to know what are the 2 or 3 top books they've been reading recently. So, do you have any book recommendations for our listeners?
Yeah, well, given this is a platform on education, a book that I read recently I think is really important for everyone, probably in classical education, to read is Eric Adler's book on the Battle of the Classics and understanding the recovery of the humanities in the right sort of way. And I just finished that and loved it. I'm also reading a biography on Charles Williams right now. He's a very interesting character that was a friend of C.S. Lewis that was a little disturbing to Tolkien. So he's an interesting
Okay.
person that I'm reading about right now as well.
All right. Well, I guess if we want to find out why it was disturbing to Tolkien, you're going to have to pick it up and read it yourself. Well, Scott, can you give us those websites once again if people want to connect with you and want to connect with Kepler Education?
Absolutely. So Kepler.education, Kepler.education, and then scottpostma.net. You can find just about everything at those two websites.
All right, Scott, it was a pleasure talking to you today, and thank you so much for being on our podcast.
Thanks, Robert. God bless you.
It's so encouraging to hear about all the options that are available for families in the United States and around the world when they want to take charge of their own education, whether it's classical conversations or one of these other platforms. We encourage all of you to take charge of your kids' education and your own. So keep practicing the 15 tools of learning and keep tuning in to Refining Rhetoric.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation, and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.